You're watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Coming up on today's programme, the government has warned it's falling behind in its plans to build a British battery manufacturing industry for a future of electric cars. The Chinese reservoirs producing artificial snow for the Winter Olympics in Beijing, where the average snowfall is less than in the UK. Koalas are put on Australia's endangered species list after a dramatic decline in numbers. And we speak to the Climate Action Network about the latest UN report sending a warning that is hard to ignore. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show, where we track the changes happening to our world right now and challenge those coming up with the solutions. Now, the electric car industry is big business. According to the IEA, in 2021, electric car sales more than doubled to 6.6 million, representing close to 9% of the global car market. But Sky News has found that the government has been privately warned that it's falling behind in its plans to build a British battery manufacturing industry. The document sent to the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy says the UK will need to increase its production of critical battery ingredients by as much as 90 times the current level. Sky's economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has been taking a look.
It looks like a vision of the fossil fuel past, but what they're making in this refinery is actually one of the answers to the biggest question of all: how to eliminate carbon emissions and to save the planet. For here in the Humber refinery, they make critical materials that go into batteries all over the world. We are quite literally in the bowels of Britain's fossil fuel industry. There is soot caked everywhere. The air is thick with a kind of acrid steam, and it's all coming from this stuff. This is graphite coke, and surprising as this might sound, it is central to resolving climate change and getting to net zero. Why? Because pretty much every battery and every electric car in the world contains that stuff in the anode. And what is that made from? It's made from crude oil. This is one of Britain's best-kept industrial secrets, one of the most important links in the global supply chain.
We're the only people in the UK that's manufacturing it, and really the only people at any scale in Europe. And so, really for the UK, it's a significant opportunity. We've got one piece of the supply chain right here around us. Right now, it all gets exported to the other side of the world.
The graphite made from this North Sea coke is one of a number of essential materials which are later assembled into batteries in machines like this. Yet for the time being, the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre, a kind of testing ground, is the only place you'll find them in this country. Is this kind of high-value manufacturing when you're talking about batteries?
Yes, it is. So it's very skilled. It's very capital-intensive as well. So to build the factories in the first place costs billions of pounds. And there's been some recent announcements in the UK, a couple of gigafactories that are going ahead.
But according to private figures submitted to the UK government, even these gigafactory plans will still leave the UK dangerously short of what it needs. At present, the UK has about 2 gigawatt-hours of battery production. By 2030, it is projected to have about 70. But if it wants to keep the car industry in its current state and protect jobs, it may need more than double that, 175 gigawatt-hours. The leaked data also shows the UK's requirements for lithium, cobalt and graphite for anodes. Currently, the bars are so small you can barely see them. By 2030, they could be 90 times higher, a 9,000% increase. Raising a question: where will it all come from? At the moment, most of the world's lithium comes out of the ground in Chile and Australia. But there are pilot projects producing lithium from quarried stone in Cornwall.
We think we've cracked it. We've made lithium battery-grade lithium carbonate. It's totally a lithium gold rush. No other commodity on the planet is growing by 30–40% per year. If you look at the UK, we've got a £96 billion automotive industry, and that's transitioning by 2030 to completely electric vehicles. So where are we going to get all of these batteries?
An unexpected story of batteries and metals, of green power sources made in fossil fuel plants. This is the story of our future. Ed Conway, Sky News.
Now for some of the day's other climate news. And Australia has officially listed koala bears as an endangered species across most of its east coast after a dramatic decline in numbers. Australia has lost about 30% of its koala population in the past 3 years, partly due to large bushfires, land clearing, drought and disease. The Woodland Trust is asking for the public's help in raising an extra £1 million to fund a project which will buy and restore a rural site in Devon. The charity wants to plant trees and shrubs and encourage existing ones to grow and transform the land near Lympstone for rare wildlife. A new multi-billion-pound offshore wind farm development is to be built off the coast of Norfolk. The Energy Secretary reapproved the plans today after they were rejected by a High Court judge last year over concerns about the project's effect on the landscape. The Vattenfall's Vanguard wind farm, which will have up to 158 turbines, could help power almost 2 million homes. Now, this year, Beijing became the first city to hold both the Olympic Games and the Winter Olympics. But for a city that gets very little snow, there have been questions about the sustainability around it being the host of the event. Well, Sky's Asia correspondent Tom Cheshire has been to the main reservoir, Beihabo, which is being used to produce snow for the Winter Olympics in Beijing, nearly 50 miles away.
Welcome to the Beijing Alps. As you can see, and as you'll know if you've been watching the Olympics, there's not much snow. Traditionally, rather an important element for a Winter Games. Beijing is incredibly dry. It gets less annual snowfall than London, so all the snow at the Games is artificial. Much of it came from the water in this reservoir, called Beihabo.
This whole area is as dry as dust, but this reservoir is a frozen oasis in the mountain desert. And the waters underneath this ice are used to supply Beijing because it has very little. But recently they've been diverted to create snow for the Winter Olympics because otherwise they'd have none.
Holding a Winter Olympics in a place where it doesn't snow, using energy-intensive machines like this, have led some to question the event's green credentials.
These are the most unsustainable games ever held because there's so much at cost from the water issues to the water availability and even to the destruction of the local nature reserve.
Others have complained about the big air site in downtown Beijing, saying it looks dystopian. That's probably unfair. This was once a huge polluting steelworks, now repurposed into a cleaner residential and commercial site. The sort of development that would be applauded in other cities. But the International Olympic Committee does understand the impression that bare mountains give viewers.
Obviously, we are in winter sport, and we have to acknowledge that what you see on the screen might be disturbing for some people. But the reality is that the Chinese are actually doing and delivering this winter sport with sustainability in mind in everything they have done. So from really building the venues or even repurposing 5 venues from 2008 to using for the first time ever 100% renewable energy, to using low carbon mobility.
Climate change means Beijing won't be the last Winter Olympic city to rely on fake snow. Snow from a reservoir rather than the sky may become the new normal. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Beijing.
And you can scan the QR code on your screen right now and listen to this week's edition of ClimateCast, where we explore whether climate change is putting the future of the Winter Olympics on thin ice with 3-time Olympian Leslie McKenna. So listen and subscribe now wherever you get your podcast from. Now, on Monday, nearly 200 nations will begin virtual meetings ahead of the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that advises governments around the world. It's expected to warn about critical loss and damage to biodiversity, which will be hard to ignore, according to the Climate Action Network. So let's speak now to Dr. Stefan Singer, who's a senior climate scientist and global energy policy advisor at the Climate Action Network. So welcome to you. So this is the second of the 3-part IPCC report. The first last August was described by the UN Secretary-General as being a code red for humanity. This one focuses on the impact of climate change and how we might be able to adapt to it. So what are you expecting?
We do expect, as international NGOs, that this report tells the truth, that science tells us soberly, correctly, what is a threat to ecosystems, to nature, to forests, to people, and what is needed to address irreversible climate change, which we are seeing increasingly. Melting ice, sea level rise, burning forests, and increased impacts on defenders of communities, defenders of the environment, poor communities, which need provisions from the rich countries for adaptation, for resilience building, and of course, to provide them with loss and damage for irreversible changes because they have no insurance. They're poor and they're the first to be affected.
How far can adaptation go in solving some of the problems associated with climate change?
That's a good question because we do not know. We know certain things can be done, certainly, but we hope it's not just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. The IPCC will look into those adaptation measures which can be done comparably easily, needs money, needs efforts, needs governmental will, and that's a key thing, but certain things cannot be adapted to. Definitely, they're irreversible thresholds. Once they're overstepped, we will never, ever be able to get back, including biodiversity loss. Irreversible losses are also probably linked to melting of polar ice sheets. So that's where we need to address early mitigation as well. This is not what the report will be talking about. It's another report which comes later. But reducing and eliminating fossil fuel emissions, eliminating greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible, coming to 100% renewable energy will complement and need to complement the strong efforts and actions and financing for adaptation and addressing loss and damage for the poorest and the most vulnerable in the world.
The first report was pretty hard-hitting. Do you think it changed people's minds within governments around the world? Will this one make a difference?
We don't know. The report is not ready yet. We will see. I'm working there. I'm the head of delegation of CAN international NGOs. With my colleagues, with my friends, with my comrades, we work closely with developing countries. We work closely with small island states. And we hope something will come out, which is, yeah, very likely another code red. But we hope we will give politicians, business people, finance people, the answer to invest rightly in the future, to decarbonization, to invest into poor people's resilience building, into poor people's defenses against climate change. Some of those impacts are unavoidable. That's why we need adaptation, big adaptation. We are far, far away from that one. And so far, rich countries have not done the job they should have been done to provide the at least $100 billion US, which was agreed already back in Copenhagen, 2009, for poor people's adaptation to climate change and poor people's help to mitigate climate change, for instance, into renewable energies and energy efficiency.
Okay.
Rich countries have not done their job.
Dr. Stefan Singer, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Do stay with us. Coming up, I'll be joined by climate activist Laura Young and Michael Jacobs, Professor of Political Economy at the University of Sheffield. And we'll discuss whether Britain's electric car industry really needs to step up again. Hello and welcome back to the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Now we're getting straight to discussing the climate issues of the day now with climate activist Laura Young and Professor of Political Economy at the University of Sheffield, Michael Jacobs. So good evening to both of you. So, electric vehicles are a big part of the government's plan to reach net zero by 2050. And it's already announced that the sale of new petrol and diesel cars will be banned by 2030. However, as we heard earlier in the show, the government has been warned that it's falling behind in its battery manufacturing industry. But how essential is that to our green ambitions? So, Michael, the government falling behind on its battery manufacturing, could that jeopardise the UK's net zero targets?
No, I don't think so. We are going to stop all new petrol and diesel cars from 2030. And that will mean a huge increase in electric vehicles, and those electric vehicles will need batteries. But if those batteries are not manufactured in the UK, that doesn't stop the manufacturers installing them and people buying them. They will be supplied from the rest of the world. Most of the world's batteries are now produced, about 70% in Asia, some in Europe, The UK only has one current battery manufacturing plant, the Nissan plant in Sunderland. There are plans for a few more. But if they're not produced in the UK, that's not a problem for the net zero target. It's a problem for our economy, and it's a problem for the jobs that could be created in green industries. This is the crucial point, is that when we go for ambitious targets, as we've got for net zero, we should be trying to maximize the employment and exporting and industrial and local regeneration opportunities that arise from making the products and providing the services. And that's where we're falling behind.
Do you agree with that, Laura? Potential implications around green jobs, but not necessarily our net zero targets?
As Michael has said, we will find our electric cars elsewhere, but one of my main concerns when it comes to the UK and thinking about electric vehicles is our reliance on using those as one of the main ways to get to net zero. I think one of the focuses that we need to also be looking at is how we're going to get to net zero through active and public transport, putting some of those electric batteries into buses and really investing in public transport infrastructure as well. I think that's one of the flaws that I've seen, is always trying to think about how we can get people from petrol cars into electric cars versus thinking of how we can get people using a variety of different types of transport, many of which are better than electric cars.
But Laura,
as well.
isn't one of the problems with that is that you're trying to say to people, give up some of your freedoms? People like having their cars and the freedom that it gives them. Doesn't that turn people off the greener message if you say, no, go and use public transport instead?
I don't think it's taking anything away from people. Actually, if anything, the way that our public transport is set up just now, it's really inaccessible to many people, whether that's price or whether that's geography. And so actually by investing in public transport and active travel, we give people more choices. I am an individual who has an electric car, but I would like to use public transport more, but it's just not affordable, or it's just not in the right places. I would also love to use my bike more and walk more, but we just aren't set up for that. And we need to be looking at how we give people more choices, especially in city centres where public transport should be easy. We see that in examples like London, but also seeing how we can connect up different areas like rural areas, so that is an option that people want to go for rather than always having to opt for their car.
And Michael, the government would say there are various initiatives to try and improve the green public transport around the country as well. But do you think the emphasis is about right as far as, you know, individual cars and public transport is concerned, and the whole lot going green? What do you think the emphasis is about right?
We have to do both of those things. Of course, we have to make the vehicles that we do have electric, and not just electric in their own propulsion, but that electricity being produced by renewable energy sources, which is actually what makes the car green. It's not just the kind of electricity, it's not just having electric vehicles, but we also have to do, as you said, the walking, the cycling, the public transport as well. But I would emphasize that this is in both of these areas, this is a huge opportunity for the UK economy to go green, for people to be employed in green sectors, for the jobs that will be lost because we're not going to have so much oil and gas production to be recreated in, for example, making batteries. And I think it is very disappointing that after really more than a decade of knowing that the electric vehicle revolution was coming. This was actually first started under the Labour government, and I was part of that process. We first identified the need for electric vehicle battery manufacturing plants in about 2008. And it's now 2022, and the UK still only has one. And we've only got plans for a few more. You know, there are 12 gigawatt hours of lithium battery manufacturing plant planned in the UK by 2025, 12. Germany expects to have 164 gigawatt hours of plants, the US 91. Now,
okay, Michael, I'm just going to stop you.
Something has gone wrong in the way we've been planning this.
Sorry to speed you up there, but I just wanted to get on to the next subject. I have a bit of time for that as well. So let's move on to that, shall we? Because as we mentioned earlier in the show, the hosts of this year's Winter Olympics have called them the greenest games ever. But are winter sports actually sustainable in a warming climate? And as locations with real snow become scarce, is their future on a slippery slope? Michael, the first Winter Olympics to rely entirely on artificial snow. Do you think the future of winter games are in jeopardy?
I certainly don't think we should ever be having an Olympic Games that requires the snow to be manufactured. This is deeply unsustainable, and this is not I think the criticisms that will be made of China, that are being made under the International Olympic Committee, will mean that they won't be able to do this again. But this is going to be a problem for all Winter Olympics. The snow-based tourism industry, particularly in Europe, is in decline because there is less snow. It's moving up the mountains, away from the resorts in many cases, which does mean that the future Olympic Games will be in jeopardy, I'm sure. And this can't be solved simply by trying to produce at huge carbon cost fake snow. So I do think that there is going to be a problem in the future. Of all the problems, however, that we face as a result of climate impacts, I don't think not having Olympic Games is the greatest of them.
Although, Laura, obviously that will come as great sadness to people and individuals who enjoy skiing and snowboarding. Obviously, it's not everybody. Some people will consider it a bit of a luxury anyway, but they'll really worry about future holidays as well. Is it something that you think we should be concerned about?
I think we should be concerned about everything that's going to be impacted by the climate crisis. And the one thing that I am pleased about, if I can phrase it that way, is that this is getting attention and it's raising awareness to the fact that even something like the Olympics, the Winter Olympics and snow sports are going to be impacted by climate change. And really, I hope it makes us look at not just snow, but actually the Olympics as a whole, as a process, as something that happens every 4 years, how we can make that more sustainable and really raise awareness of all the areas that are going to be impacted by this. And even if you don't ski, it's still nice to be able to go out on a snowy day and see something that should be natural in many places around the world. And I think this will hopefully get us moving even quicker towards the sustainable future that we need so that we can enjoy skiing on the slopes.
So, Laura, do you think this whole conversation actually is good for raising awareness then, as you're saying? I mean, the fact that people will be surprised perhaps to know that there are going to be fewer and fewer possible locations in future for the Winter Olympics. They may have to travel further for a winter skiing holiday. At least it raises awareness of the issues.
I think it is really important. And actually, artificial snow has been used before in Winter Olympics, not 100% of it, but even as far back as the 1980s, we were using it to top up our Winter Olympic sports. And I think it's now that we realise, because our awareness has been raised through many other things, that we are starting to pay attention. And there's been studies done in the last 4 years and even some research that came out just this year, looking at how many previous locations wouldn't be viable to be used for the Winter Olympics because of safety and because they wouldn't have any snow by 2050, and even looking as far into the future as 2080 if the temperatures keep rising at the way they are going. And I think this is something that has really put sustainability on centre stage, looking at it through a lens of sport. And this is the kind of interdisciplinary approach that we need to take when it comes to climate action, looking at how it's going to affect everything and making people really sit up and realise that this is going to impact them and all the things that they enjoy. So we need to get moving.
OK, on that note, we will leave it. But Laura Young and Michael Jacobs, thank you both very much indeed for your time. And that's it from me, but we'll be back next time with more climate news every weekday at 8:30 here on the Daily Climate Show. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.